Nuclear stocks have surged in 2025 as big tech companies look to alternative energy sources to power the AI revolution. The VanEck Uranium and Nuclear ETF has climbed roughly 50% so far this year. And one high flying name that has caught investors' attention is Nano Nuclear Energy. The New York based company is focused on developing micro modular reactors as part of its portfolio of clean energy solutions. Since making its public debut in May 2024, Nano Nuclear Energy stock has skyrocketed 650%, thanks to the bullish outlook for AI energy demand. But the company has yet to sell any of its finished products, and the material transition to nuclear power sources may be years away. So, how should investors view this emerging market opportunity? On this episode of Growth Stories, we talk to Nano Nuclear Energy CEO James Walker to learn about the company's quest to bring portable nuclear power to market. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Alexis.
Now, walk us through the business here. What are some of the use cases you see, or perhaps what do you see as the investor thesis?
It's a good question because the sort of new area of nuclear, it caters towards a sort of a broader range of applications now. So you've seen big civil nuclear power plants powering cities, but now we're in a position where we can power smaller things, chemical plants, industrial centers, data centers, AI centers. And even if you go smaller, you can be looking at remote operations for things like mining sites, oil and gas, military bases, disaster relief areas, island communities. So it is a new wave of sort of nuclear energy and a new range of applications now it can cater for.
Your micromodular reactors have gotten a lot of attention. Can you tell us how they work and how maybe the deployment of those reactors differs versus a traditional nuclear facility?
Absolutely. So it's a good question. So fortunately, the fission, the key part of any nuclear reactor, I mean, that is the same process that occurs in a big civil nuclear power plant, but things like the coolant would change or the type of fuel that would change. But the fission event is what creates that heat that gets converted to electric that powers things. In our Kronos reactor, that is a high temperature gas reactor, very well known tech, been in operation for 60 years, deployed all over the world, but never at this scale commercially. So for the first time, we're going to be making much smaller reactors. And the reason why we're doing that too is that so we can have a production line of these things being produced on a mass scale. And through that methodology, we'll have economies of scale to start driving down the cost of nuclear energy and the timelines for deployment, because we won't have big construction and fabrication events at the site. The reactor will be effectively all made at the production line and licensed there and then delivered to site and assembled like a Lego set. So it's a very different prospect to what you've seen in the past. And it's also kind of industry's way of navigating some of the challenges that have befallen larger civil nuclear power plants.
I think when you're talking about reactors, some people have concerns about the dangers of nuclear power. How safe are these reactors?
This is a very important thing. I think that we need to keep reiterating to the public in general, because I always like to point out that even if you were to take the conventional civil nuclear power plants, and they've been in operation obviously for decades, but you were to look at deaths per gigawatt hour for all types of energy, nuclear beats out even wind and solar in terms of safety already. But these new nuclear power plants, they don't have the worst case accident scenarios that the big civil nuclear power plants have. They could still melt down if there's something like a loss of coolant accident or a depressurized system. But the new type of reactors, especially like our reactor and a lot of other vendors involved in this space, they've got sort of fuels like the TRISO fuel, where each fuel pellet has its own containment system. So it can't experience that kind of meltdown that you could see at Fukushima or 3 Mile Island. It's just not possible. I mean, theoretically, even if you were to blow up the reactor with a missile or something like that, or a terrorist attack, you would just actually separate the critical mass so the reactor would get less reactive and all of the fuel would be contained. So already the safest form of energy ever devised by mankind, made safer still.
And we've seen a lot of attention paid to the mini modular reactors, but what are some of the other business lines your company is focused on?
The interesting part is that there's sort of this massive resurgent interest in nuclear energy at the moment. And obviously we started our business concentrating on applications like small reactors that could cater towards these different places. But as we built, we realized that actually a lot of US industry had atrophied because it had an ability to buy highly enriched final product from Russia. And that meant a sort of underinvestment in the US infrastructure with regard enrichment and conversion, transportation, all of these different elements. So now the company is taking a look at one, de-risking its own reactor development by involving itself in these different areas amongst the fuel supply chain, but also building up our internal capabilities, which gives us the capability to provide consultancy services, transportation services, and then also be involved in the build back of that fuel supply chain. So if we win or if our competitors do very well, we would still benefit. So we want everyone to win in this business. It would benefit us as a company greatly. So.
And big tech players like Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, and Google have taken steps to supplement their energy requirements with nuclear. What have you been hearing from these hyperscalers in terms of demand outlook?
So we have been talking with the hyperscalers and the tech companies. I mean, it's very interesting. Some of the projections of the amount of power that they actually need are astronomical. And even if they were to find coal or gas or anything like that that could power these centers, they would still need massive grid infrastructure upgrades, which would cost billions and billions of dollars to get into a point where they could outlay the power that they would require. Not to mention gas pipelines and transmission lines. But nuclear, they've settled on because it has that high base load power. It can be put anywhere. It doesn't need the grid necessarily because you could co-locate with nuclear. And so they've sort of, the tech industry, it's not an advocate for nuclear inherently, but it's been pushed into our direction, and it's sort of settled on the long-term strategy. We'll need to have a big nuclear component, because even if you were to have all the wind and solar you could manage, those are still locationally dependent energy systems that don't have high base load. They would still need very expensive and expansive storage capacities. So just by default, the tech industry has sort of found nuclear and is investing very heavily into that space because it needs to de-risk its own future. And by investing in nuclear, it can do that.
And many of these companies are also investing in their own nuclear solutions. And it sounds like you have a rising tide lifts all ships mentality when it comes to the competitive field. But I'm just curious, how do you view the competition and what makes nano nuclear energy stand out?
So, I mean, the nice part is that I think pretty much most of the reactors that you see being proffered for the market, they will almost certainly work. Now, there might be obviously different levels of efficiency and all that sort of thing. What I would say is that the final application will determine who might be best suited. So, for instance, a lot of reactors are going much larger than, say, our largest reactor. Like they're making 300 megawatt systems, 400 megawatt systems. Now, if you do that, you cannot make a completely modular reactor because you would still need to fabricate some key components of your reactor, like the reactor vessel, just because you couldn't move an item that large by road. So the tactic we've taken is to make a reactor as large as you can possibly make it, and keep it completely modular. So we can have that production line where 100% of the components can be rolled off and then shipped directly to site and assembled. And we've done that so we get the economies of scale, and we also can avoid sort of the high capital cost that could be associated with individual construction projects. So we've tried to be as strategic as possible, and our market analysis has been incredibly detailed ahead of any sort of even engineering decision we've tried to take. So we're just taking a sensible approach to a massively growing market and the demands of where we see the big buyers of this product will be.
A lot of investors seem to be bullish on this field, but it's also a little bit hard to determine a growth trajectory. What timeline do you see for these designs to be deployed, and how much investment do you think that's going to take?
It's a very good question. There are almost two answers. So certainly by the end of this decade, you'll see a number of advanced reactor systems getting licensed by the federal regulator, which essentially means at that point they can commercially sell their systems. One of the big bottlenecks in the US is, as we mentioned, we touched on earlier, that fuel supply chain in the US needs to be built back. So while you might have these licensed systems, the mass manufacture of the fuel to mass manufacture the reactors needs to be in place. And that might put us all in the same boat of sometime around about 2030, early 2030s, the mass rollout of fuel that enables the mass rollout of reactors. That might be a key point. So despite what anybody's timelines might say, we might all be waiting on just that mass rollout of fuel. But the good part is that the energy demands aren't going away. The reindustrialization of the country, electrification of it, the tech demands, even the DoD's mandate to be able to build back the capability to manufacture the fuel that they would need to go into submarines or aircraft carriers. That's all converging at a certain point. So there's going to be a big growth in the industry over the next few years, all the way leading up to reactors. And at that point, it's really going to take off even further from that point onwards.
And you've talked about the importance of economies to scale, but what are some of the challenges or perhaps problems that need to be solved to get this market to scale?
It's a good question because historically, say Westinghouse, they make wonderful AP1000s, a great reactor system, gigawatt power systems and above. But because they were sort of individual projects with individual site licensing, what industry has tried to do now with small modular reactors is to mass manufacture them to get economies of scale through numbers rather than just through one large system. And what we've seen through our own modeling is that the small modular reactors become more cost competitive very quickly with the large reactor, provided they just keep rolling these systems out. And certainly below a small modular reactor producing around about a gigawatt of power, at that point they become more economic than the large civil nuclear power plants. Fortunately, that cost saving continues to increase. So it certainly is the future of the industry, and our modeling does show that provided we do get those economies of scale, we can roll out those reactor systems, dozens on an annual basis. We can keep driving down that power. One will be expensive, many will be cheap. And fortunately, we can hopefully get into a position where we can start driving down the cost of nuclear power into single digits, cents per kilowatt, like 5, 6, 7, 8 cents per kilowatt. And then you start getting more competitive with even things like gas and coal at that point.
Generating revenue is step one. Then profitability is the next important item on the list for investors. So, what's the timeline looking for both of those items?
Most of the customers we talk to, including the tech industry, they don't want to buy a reactor, they don't want to own the reactor, they don't want to operate it, and they don't want to be responsible for it, but they want to buy the power all day long. So for that reason, it's likely that we won't actually end up selling the reactor. Like our company, as example, will stay the owner and operator of the reactor, and we'll sell power over a contracted period of time. So we'll bear that upfront capital cost, but we'll apportion that into the lifetime of the contract. So even after sort of 3-4 years of operation, depending on the size, obviously, of the operation itself, we get into a profit period. And then for the lifetime and the duration of the reactor's operation after that period, we're essentially in that profit period for the duration. So it's a nice business. We'll bear that upfront cost and we'll deploy, but we get very quickly into, during the lifetime of the operation, relatively, that profit period. And then the company is in a very, very strong position at that moment, just to keep taking that revenue and income inwards.
And you've talked about the importance of building back that fuel supply chain. And we've seen the Trump administration make moves to make nuclear energy more accessible, certainly making more investment in the energy sector here in the US. Are there any regulatory actions that need to be taken from your point of view that would help get these products to market faster?
Already the federal regulator, the NRC, I mean, despite what anyone says about them, I think they're a great organization. They've had a lot of pressure put on them. They are trying to reform as rapidly as they can, just to try and facilitate this massive upsurge in nuclear demand. And they've done things that are going to obviously benefit us directly. And just to name a few, they're looking at being able to enable the transportation of fueled reactors, provided control rods are inserted and they're made safe, to just deploy these things directly to sites. But beyond that as well, just being able to license a reactor at factory level. So effectively, once you ship it from the factory, it's already licensed. And once it gets to site, it can just be constructed without needing the federal regulatory involvement. That automatically enables the mass rollout of reactor systems. Now, obviously, they'll have to meet certain environmental conditions, seismic, flooding risks, temperature gradients, all those kind of those things that will be pre-agreed with the federal regulator. But they are making these allowances. They are making these changes to facilitate this rollout. And look, they're getting it from all sides. There's the tech industry is lobbying, the DoD is putting pressure on them, the DOE is putting pressure on them, and a lot of that pressure is also coming from government because they need more power, they need more domestic capability to manufacture fuel. So that's sort of falling on the NRC to try and reform to one, be able to license all of these different systems and do more than it could ever do before, and do it expeditiously. So yeah, they've got their work cut out, but they're working hard at it.
So, James, what would you say are the biggest strategic priorities for nano-nuclear energy in the coming year?
Certainly for the coming year, we've got two wonderful projects that we're building at the moment. Not a lot of reactor companies want to build big prototype systems representative of their final reactors, but we've got two construction projects, one at the University of Illinois. We'll start drilling within the next few months, just to get the geological characterization work that we need so we can put in for a permit to construct. And we have a similar project up in Canada because we want to be one of the first movers in Canada to have a licensed advanced reactor system ready to be deployed up there as well. So we can hit the ground running in two countries very quickly. So over the next year, the construction of those projects and the development of those prototype reactor systems will be a big occupying task for us. And we're building up the team commensurately with that. Our chief technical officer has just bought a massive building in the Chicago area, and he's already staffed it with about 30 engineers, and he'll build up to, I think, about 50, just so they can manage the big construction projects that we're looking at in both Illinois and Canada.
For investors that are interested in this field, what would you say the biggest takeaway would be for you as this market continues to grow?
So, I mean, certainly when you're talking to markets, they're always concerned about near term and long term at the same time. What I could say now is that the long term, I would say, is very de-risked. We know this power is needed and it can't be replaced, and there's no commensurate power that can provide commensurate capabilities. Location anywhere, high baseload power, and to the extent and scale that it's needed. So the long term is de-risked. So I would say investing now is investing in the future of that. Nuclear will play an increasingly crucial part in industry, but the fact is that once it starts becoming, and you do get those economies of scale we talked about earlier, and you can mass manufacture the reactor systems and driving down that power, it'll be more widely deployed across the US, even in residential settings.
Well, James, thank you so much for your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Okay, no problem at all. Thanks for having me, Alexis.